So our timeline was we took about 2 months to do an RFP process and select a vendor, and then we had 6 months from when the ink was dry to the servers getting turned off in the old data center.
And they own the asset and manage it, or?
So yes, so we're currently running out of IBM SoftLayer on their bare metal infrastructure. So they own the hardware. They manage basically we manage everything from the OS up, and they'll manage the hardware and most of the networking. The networking stuff gets gray for us, but we're a bit of a special case. Cool.
So during this migration, are there any links that just didn't make it?
Not that we're aware of. So that's something that we did have. It certainly was something that took work. We did build. So one of the things that again was a really big benefit that running systems in parallel across systems is you can run audits, right? So we were able to do some pretty thorough auditing. I don't think we literally checked every single link because there's something like 60 billion of them, and that takes doing 60 billion of anything takes time. But we were able to make sure all the tables had reasonable numbers. There wasn't hey, there's a gig missing over here. What's that about, right? So there was that. We did have some interesting games, just in that when you have 8+-year-old data sets, some of the old entries sometimes are maybe a little weird. So I don't think it was quite in that system, but there were one or two other systems where there were entries that didn't survive the move, but they were definitely just screwed in the old system anyway. It's it was fine. Nothing was newly broken, right? But this is again if you have systems of a certain age, this is stuff that happens. But yeah, no, we did put a lot of time and attention into making sure things didn't get left behind.
Did you move everything on financial systems, or was your stuff already in the cloud? You didn't need to worry about moving?
Thankfully, our product doesn't handle money. The billing for us happens to something that people are surprised to learn about Bitly is we have a very enterprisey pricing model. According to all our billing happens literally sending people invoices and getting checks and wire transfers. So that all happens outside our system. So that made that easier. It makes other things problematic, but that was easier. We did also have, and still do have, a certain footprint in AWS for secondary systems. So that we mostly just didn't touch. And one or two things we pushed in there. And we used a certain amount of so one of the ways we cheated with the whole transferring over the wire instead of a station wagon thing, because the pipes coming out of the old data center were alarmingly small. So we had stuff that we had incrementally pushed up to S3 over time, so we'd stuck some stuff down from S3 instead of data center to data center. But sorry.
Yeah. So in the context of the microservices that you had running, I just want to know what was the most unexpected dependency between some of those services you encountered in the move?
Most unexpected dependency. I think it was mostly trying to think of it. I think there were some places. So we have a few places where we create and or consume effectively derivative streams, right? So we have our thing, the stream coming off of our redirect system is we call decodes, and then we'll have various levels of enrichment that happen asynchronously downstream. So we had one or two systems that would, for various reasons, ingest multiple varieties of that, and that was a place where it was kind of easy to go, oh, whoops, think that we already accounted for something, but then go oh, okay, this also came there. I think that there was that. There was also some places where it's more just config management side. Since we were kind of running, we mostly did just a lift and shift, and not things mostly look the same, the old and the new. But going from CentOS 5 to CentOS 7, It turns out over the course of a decade and a half, the Linux kernel changed a little bit. So we discovered some things with that, and like just some things that like maybe we weren't completely rigorous in describing dependencies and how they mapped in our old config management setup that happened to work there, but when we like laid out things a little different in the new world, uncovered places where we just need to add explicit dependencies.
Just curious, but what are you guys using for configuration management?
Some crazy homegrown piles of Python and Bash. We're in the process of moving to SaltStack. It's one of those games of like, we built it before Chef and Puppet were things, and like it works well enough that it's hard to justify the move, but we're moving to SaltStack.
You talked about like the dumpster picture. So like throwing things out as you're moving. So what were some of the things that your team found that were you removing dead code, or just like servers that weren't serving things, or like apps that were no longer doing what kind of stuff?
So it was a mix. So there were just some servers that like the way our old hosting arrangement worked. We did have some servers that effectively we could just burn and forget about. The other places there were some actual like product features, which by killing the product feature let us kill systems that drove it. Bitly went through an interesting transition where there was a time where we were trying to be a social network around bookmarks, and then moved to the current enterprise product. And accordingly, there were some features from that social network era that didn't really make sense anymore. We had already killed a lot of those before we started the move, but there were a handful that we still just needed to pull the trigger on. And the other thing was data sets. So like we had a HDFS cluster that had basically all the data since 2008. And there were a few data sets where like we had that replicated to S3, so like we weren't losing it, but we didn't actively need it for anything in the new data center. So we decided to just not like move like the last year of data or something like that.
Just sorry, a quick follow-up. So like for the teams that were there people who were managing, let's say like the social apps that were still responsible for that, or had that just largely gone?
We're a small enough company where everybody was doing pretty much everything. Like so like I said, like the actual move was mostly 5 people, but with some additional people.
Okay.
But like the entire engineering org is like 20 something people. So.
Sorry to talk about this, but how many services do you have that it's going through, and how did you map out this to start?
I'm not sure I have an actual number there. Probably the most, as far as how we mapped it out, I would say there's two sides. One side is, thankfully before we did this move through various parts of the history, one thing we learned through a failed experiment is cyclic dependencies are a real bad idea. Don't do that. So thankfully we had removed those before we started this move, because that made, if we still had those, that would have been awful. So that's just a general, like, turns out graph theory applies to real life situation. That aside, it was a combination of basically working through our config management, right? So like we are, like, part of how we stay sane with the code, like Bitly has an alarming volume of code in relation to the number of engineers. So again, over the course of 9 years, people have written some stuff. Part of how we stay sane is we have some fairly strict conventions about like how different services call to each other, how we manage basically service discovery. So for us, that happens to be through like our own weirdo tooling, but like whatever you're using for just, if you're using service discovery, that's a great mechanism for discovering dependencies. The other one for us was the messaging topology of the pub subsystem, and working backwards through that.
So, I defer to Rick. You did all this in 8 months, basically?
Yeah, it was 2 months to select a vendor, and then the actual move was 6 months.
And you said mainly 5 employees?
For the most part, yeah.
How much extra, just curious, how much extra like workload did that put on those people? Like how much, like their hours and
I mean,
how much more work are they doing other than other normal day-to-day responsibilities?
it's an interesting question. Certainly some.
Yeah.
It's a little hard in that we did actively build up our DevOps team before starting this. So like the team